Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
How about them Cowboys? They are down bad, aren't they? And it's about to get worse. Also, the Saints made a move to save the days of future past, and the Jets should be sellers at the deadline, but they won't be.
I'm Peter Bukowski, starting your day with the can't-miss stories and biggest debates in sports. You're Locked On Sports Today.
Searching all major sports. Found.
Let's start with the biggest story.
The Dallas Cowboys add injury to insult on what was already looking like it might be a lost season, sitting at 3-5 after a 27-21 loss to the Atlanta Falcons on Sunday. Dak Prescott has a hamstring injury that's going to keep him out at least a month here. That's the foreseeable future for the Dallas Cowboys. Cooper Rush going to be the guy here. Marcus Mosher from Locked On Cowboys, always our guy here, especially with the Dallas Cowboys. And Marcus, are we looking at a team that could go into sell mode before the trade deadline, or where do they go from here?
I don't think they're going to be sellers at the deadline because, honestly, you look at the roster, there's not much to sell. A lot of the players that are...
That's why they're 3-5, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of the free agents that they do have, I would expect to have a big market in free agency next year. So you're better off just keeping them this year and getting compensatory picks down the line. They're not going to be sellers, but I also don't see them being buyers either. This is going to be a really rough stretch. The way the schedule works out for the Cowboys, they've got 4 games here like in the next 20 days. Dak Prescott isn't going to play any of those. And if the Cowboys are 3-9 or 4-8, if you're an optimistic person, what's the point of even bringing him back, assuming he's ready to go when they play the Bengals on Sunday Night Football in week 14 or whatever it is? This is just not a good Cowboys team. And I think Cowboy fans are coming to the reality that we might be looking at a team that finishes with 5 or 6 wins this year.
Well, and you look up the upcoming schedule, it's Philadelphia, it's Houston, it's at Washington, and it's home for the Giants.
Thanksgiving, baby.
And we saw, even with Dak Prescott, the Giants gave the Cowboys a run for their money once already this season. And so that's only going to amplify these conversations around Mike McCarthy's future with the Cowboys. I look at it the other way, though. Jerry Jones is not someone who wants to make these sorts of moves. He waited famously or infamously, depending on your perspective, way too long to make a move on Jason Garrett. He is not someone who really just wants to throw this into chaos mode. He could point to this and say, hey, this is the reason why we got to give Big Mike another opportunity here.
And if you remember the end of the Jason Garrett era, Jerry Jones really didn't make a decision. His contract ran out. They just decided not to extend him, and that's what led to Mike McCarthy. I think Jerry Jones and the Cowboys are going to let Mike McCarthy coach out the remainder of the season. For a lot of different reasons. He's a professional. They want to allow him the opportunity to try to fix this and make his job look like he did a better job here than maybe what the record shows. But I have no doubt that the Cowboys are going to have a new head coach in 2025.
No doubt.
No doubt.
Why make the move now as opposed to, say, at the end of last season? Not now, meaning, but now at the end of this year.
I think because they did have the 3 straight 12-5 seasons that Jerry Jones was hopeful that everything could come together. They didn't want to overturn the apple cart, right? It just hopefully the ball bounces your way. But now that they clearly regressed, and it's just obvious that he's not the long-term guy here, they're going to move on. Now, the only question is, do they go for a retread to help kind of turn this thing around really quickly, whether it's Bill Belichick, Mike Vrabel? Do they go with somebody that has ties to the organization like a Aaron Glenn or an Anthony Lynn? Or do they go outside the box and try to get their next Sean McVay or Matt LaFleur and hire a Ben Johnson? I got to believe with the timeline that Jerry Jones has here, which I think everybody knows what I'm referring to, they're going to go with a proven head coach that can try to make them competitive in 2025.
Bill Belichick, you are a Dallas Cowboy head coach. No, I mean, of course, we will see what happens here. I think the questions about how they handled this offseason then have to be brought back up because we were on this show. I know that you guys were talking about it going, we're waiting to see them do something. Like, was anyone really expecting this team to get meaningfully better from last season when really all they did was lose players versus adding them?
No, I mean, they lost a lot of talent this offseason. It's why our friends at FanDuel had the Cowboys at 9.5 wins this year. Like, they projected a big drop off. And I don't think Cowboy fans were expecting them to be great. I think a lot of them assumed they would maybe squeak into the playoffs and then lose in round 1 or round 2. But I also think this is why you saw the Cowboys be very laissez-faire in the offseason, because they know signing a Derrick Henry wasn't going to be the difference between this team making the Super Bowl and not making the Super Bowl, right? Signing one more defensive end wasn't going to make them a 7-2 team rather than a 3-6 team, right? I think they understood where they were at. I think for once, the organization did have some clarity of like, hey, this is our year to kind of reset things a little bit, and we're going to move forward in 2025. And I think you're seeing that play out in the field. They're just not a very good team, and they don't have a very good roster.
Quickly, you mentioned all of those things. Well, CeeDee Lamb, top of market money. Dak Prescott, top of market money. Micah Parsons, we're top of market money is the conversation there. So, like, how appealing is this job when you're already paying all of these star players, and that wasn't good enough before?
I still think it's appealing because they're going to have 10 draft picks next year. They do have a quarterback, wide receiver, and pass rusher. Those are 3 of the 5 money positions, right? There's not a lot of other situations that have that. They do have a team that's going to play in a bunch of primetime games. Obviously, you want that if you're a coach. But you have to deal with Jerry Jones and Stephen Jones in the Dallas Cowboy environment. So that's a negative. But compare that to some of the other jobs that might be available this year, like Las Vegas, the Saints, the Jets. I think this one's still more appealing than all those other jobs.
Stay up to date all year on the Dallas Cowboys by subscribing to Locked On Sports today and Locked On Cowboys on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Thanks for making Locked On Sports today your first listen. Coming up, the Saints were done with the present and decided to look to the future. Before we get to that, the NBA was busy on election eve. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live event even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more near you. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem that code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. The Chiefs put their perfect record on the line as Baker Mayfield brought the banged-up Bucks to town, and this primetime matchup did not disappoint.
And the Kansas City Chiefs moved to 8-0 on the season with a huge overtime win against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at Arrowhead. Patrick Mahomes, 3 touchdowns on 3 third downs, 2 of them to the new wide receiver DeAndre Hopkins. Absolutely huge night for both Hopkins and Mahomes. This was a game that they absolutely needed to win. They continue to pound the rock late in the game. Kareem Hunt got going in the fourth quarter and in overtime, and he was able to get the win at the very end of the game from 3rd down and 1 at the 2-yard line, able to run it in and get a score to win the game against the Buccaneers. Chiefs, like I said, moved to 8-0 on the season. Mahomes did have an injury scare. Looks like he's going to be okay. Looked like it could be a knee injury, ended up being an ankle injury. He went back in the game and played after the fourth quarter. Much more to come shortly on Locked On Chiefs.
And the Cleveland Cavaliers are the talk of the NBA. And so are the Milwaukee Bucks for very different reasons. They faced off on Monday night.
I mean, the reality is at this point, like, the Bucks suck until further notice is sort of my mindset. And there's obviously reasons for that, such as obviously Chris Middleton's absence doesn't help. And in this game, obviously finding out, an hour before tip off that Giannis isn't going to play, your expectations are obviously very low. And I also similarly thought, as you mentioned, back to the game, which, middle of last year was eventually cited as one of the games that really got Adrian Griffin fired. And Giannis also didn't play in that game, but I remember correctly, Dame played, if I remember correctly. And Chris had a terrible game in that one. And, it just felt like they didn't have shots going and they just kind of quit. And that really was what it felt like. And they're in such a tenuous spot right now, right? I think we've talked about it. You come into a regular season, I mean, whatever. We spent all summer trying to figure out how good teams are going to be and blah, blah, blah. But we don't really know until we see teams play actual games. And for whatever baseline you expected of Milwaukee Bucks, and even accounting for, Chris Middleton's absence, blah, 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 they've been obviously much worse than probably any of us expected, right?
The vibes were immaculate on the Big Easy after week 2. The Saints had scored what seemed to be 100 points and were an easy 2-0. Fast forward to now, and they've lost 7 in a row. As Locked On Saints host Ross Jackson points out, it was high time for a change at head coach.
But the New Orleans Saints absolutely needed to make this move. The New Orleans Saints franchise was once upon a time, in a not too distant past, a team that was built on streaks. Playoff streaks, win streaks at home. Remember, with a dome field advantage, all of that. Streaks like the defense not allowing 100-yard rushers, all of those pieces. The New Orleans Saints now are a team of firsts, and that has been the story of Dennis Allen's career and tenure, as the New Orleans Saints head coach. Yesterday, the New Orleans Saints suffered their 7th straight loss for the first time since 1999. They became the first team in the last 20 years to lose a game in which they outgained an opponent by 150 plus yards and won the turnover battle, only to lose that game. They opened up the opportunity for quarterback Bryce Young to see his first victory formation of his career. That will be the end of the story for Dennis Allen, as Dennis Allen becomes the first head coach the New Orleans Saints have moved on from or had depart mid-season since Jim Mora in the 80s. And that was a resignment. This was a firing. And this was a move that the New Orleans Saints needed to make. Again, with all due respect to the humans that are impacted by this story, there is nothing about what the New Orleans Saints have done over the course of the last 3 years, and especially this historic for New Orleans 7-game losing streak that they're experiencing right now, that they have extended against the NFL's worst team in the league, a team that they absolutely throttled to open up the season. There is no way that you can move past this and not make a change. One thing that we know in all walks of life, every single walk of life, no matter what background you come from, what job you work, what things you believe in, what things you don't believe in, is that resentment travels. Resentment moves. Resentment moves along. And when you as an organization are faced in a situation like this, you have to keep resentment from traveling. That's why you have to make this move if you're the New Orleans Saints. You move on from Dennis Allen immediately, because if you don't, or if you didn't, right, the Saints did, but if you didn't, then players begin to resent that coach. And let me tell you, I spoke with a couple of players this morning from both sides of the football that have multiple years experience working with Dennis Allen after Nick Underhill's report over at New Orleans Football about Dennis Allen losing the locker room. Asked them, what would you say? What do you have to say about the idea of Dennis Allen losing your locker room? One player simply said yes. Another player simply said been lost, as if the locker room had been lost. So you have to do this. And so you see the resentment that was already starting to pile up for Dennis Allen. If you as an organization, Gail Benson, Mickey Loomis, Dennis Lauscha, the New Orleans Saints organization as a whole, didn't make this move today, that resentment moves from Dennis Allen and straight to you, the decision maker, for having that guy still in that building, having that guy still at that podium, and having that guy still in those team meetings and on that sideline. That resentment travels. And when that happens and that permeates, your organization then gets into new general manager conversations, new ownership conversations, and all those things. Gail Benson and the New Orleans Saints did the right thing by moving on from Dennis Allen when it came to this move. And now look, this isn't going to make the season better moving forward, right? The Saints are 2-7 through their first 9 games. They're not mathematically eliminated from the playoffs, but they're realistically eliminated from the playoffs. They have 8 games ahead. You're not going to turn the season around just because Dennis Allen has been fired, but you now begin to have an eye towards building and laying the foundation for what your future becomes for your team.
Stay up to date on the New Orleans Saints all year long by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Saints on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Coming up, the Jets should sell, but they won't. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. And that winning $5 bet could be an early Week 10 line. The Baltimore Ravens have a chance to put away the Cincinnati Bengals. Or is it that the Cincinnati Bengals have a chance to revive their season against the Baltimore Ravens? FanDuel sees it the first way. They have Baltimore 6.5-point favorites over Cincy on Thursday night. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Aaron Rodgers has been doing his best Bible salesman impersonation since Hard Knocks showed up to the Jets facility in 2023. Reality has hit hard, though. Even with the win last Thursday night, Locked On NFL scouting hosts Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino believe it's time for the Jets to be sellers at the trade deadline, even though they won't.
New York Jets, a half a game in front of the two teams we just talked about that we felt should be selling, maybe won't sell, but should be selling. They've obviously already bought with Devontae Adams. There's some talk about maybe like DJ Reed if they were going to move a piece away, but they did the thing and won on Thursday and have had the extra 3 days of hopium before the deadline. I like that. I don't think they're like, I don't. Aaron Rodgers been the salesman like Al Michaels talking about on the broadcast, right? He's like, you start believing him. He's talking about if we just do this and this.
Yeah, okay.
I don't think they're going to sell.
Yeah, I don't think so either. They should. And so if the objective is to say what they should do, they should sell.
Who should they sell?
Mike Williams. They should sell. Boy. I don't know, man. Hassan Reddick. It's tough. It's not that good of a football team. Like, they need defensive line help. They're 3-6, you know, like, but the 3-6 year.
So they should buy defensive line help.
They should not.
This is cover your ass time for the general manager. Joe Douglas drafted Zach Wilson. We know that went terribly. Then, in a move that we also believe, based on reporting, to be highly driven by ownership, they bring in Aaron Rodgers to try and fix all of this. They fired the coach. Most GMs do not get this many opportunities to deal with the coach, to deal with the quarterback. They have failed with two of these quarterbacks. Aaron Rodgers has not been the savior they were looking for. And so a person trying to save his job is not going to necessarily do the thing that is the best shepherding of the team for the future. And because ownership drove this decision with Aaron Rodgers to go get him and to stick with him, they're not going to be the kind of owner to step in and say, hey, we need to think about the long-term outlook. They're going, hey, we got to find a way to make this work, even though anyone who's watching can see it's not gonna. This is how bad teams stay bad. And finally, Justin Herbert and Shaquille O'Neal. Jim Harbaugh thinks they have something in common. Harbaugh and the Chargers submitted clips of players they believe warranted roughing the passer penalties but received no flags. Harbaugh compares Herbert's plight to that of Shaq's when he would get not get the foul call because he was the biggest guy on the court. Harbaugh said, does it sound like I'm complaining? Maybe I could be. I think he doesn't get some of those calls when they should be called. Maybe there's some frustration there, but Herbert has not received any roughing the passer calls on his behalf. Superman? No. The big diesel? No, it's California. Probably more like an EV. I don't know. Justin Herbert needs a nickname for the aura, though. He really does. If you're catching this episode after hearing your favorite Locked On show, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Also, if you're a new subscriber to Locked On Sports Today, we're here for you with the biggest stories in sports every day. Coming up on the next Locked On Sports Today, we'll discuss what the Bengals will need to do to beat the Ravens. So at least until tomorrow, stay locked on sports today.
Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
Go to our video on demand. Click on sports at the top of your screen. There, you'll find past episodes of Locked On Sports Today, plus other Locked On shows on demand.